I want you to imagine a scenario for a second. It is this physiological sensation that is probably entirely too familiar for a lot of people.
Oh, I think I know exactly where you're going with this.
Right. So you are sitting at your desk at work, or perhaps you're standing in your kitchen talking to your partner, and you just hear yourself saying yes to something.
But inside, your stomach has completely dropped.
Exactly. Your stomach drops, your heart rate elevates just a tiny fraction, and every single fiber of your biological system is just screaming, no.
Yeah, that is a very real, very physical reaction.
And you just feel completely drained, like you are running on fumes. You are perpetually walking on eggshells around this highly demanding boss, or maybe a manipulative romantic partner.
Or even just a friend who seems to just extract energy from you.
Yes, exactly. And despite your absolute best efforts to be accommodating, to be the peacemaker, to smooth over every rough edge in the room, you somehow constantly end up feeling like the friction is entirely your fault.
Well, it is an incredibly heavy allostatic load to carry. That constant state of hypervigilance isn't just an emotional drain.
Yeah.
It is a profound physiological stressor.
Because your body is just constantly on high alert.
Right. You are effectively burning immense amounts of cognitive fuel just trying to manage someone else's unpredictable emotional weather patterns.
And the confusion that follows that is just as exhausting as the vigilance itself. I mean, you sit there in the aftermath and you start to wonder, why does this keep happening to me?
Yeah, you start blaming yourself.
You do. You think, are the people around me just inherently toxic? Or, and I think this is the really terrifying thought, is there some kind of invisible target painted right on my back?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a very common fear.
Because you just feel completely stuck in this endless repeating loop. There is the external manipulation happening to you, and then there is this internal self-doubt churning inside you.
And you just feel completely unable to break the cycle.
Exactly. So that sensation of being trapped in a loop is exactly what we are mapping out today. We are going to explore the hidden mechanics of human behavior to answer that specific question.
Which is, why do we fall into these psychological traps in the first place?
Right. And to do this, we really have to examine two opposing forces. First, the external tactics of manipulation.
Like the precise mechanisms certain individuals employed to control situations and people.
Yes. And second, the internal hidden vulnerabilities within ourselves that make us susceptible to those very tactics. Because, you cannot fully neutralize the external threat without addressing the internal architecture that allows it in.
That is such an important distinction. You really have to look at both sides of the coin.
I was actually thinking about how to visualize this dynamic, and it reminds me of cybersecurity.
Oh, that is an interesting way to look at it. How so?
Well, think about a massive corporate network. We spend virtually all of our time and energy securing the external perimeter, right?
Yeah, putting up defenses?
We build massive firewalls, we install the latest antivirus software, we mandate these incredibly complex passwords. That is us trying to manage our external world, trying to block the hackers from getting through the front gate.
Right.
But while we are obsessing over the firewall, we completely ignore the outdated, patched-together legacy code running deep inside our own operating system.
Oh, wow. So the vulnerabilities are already inside.
Exactly. We forget about the internal system vulnerabilities that we never bothered to update. And it really doesn't matter how strong your firewall is if you have an unpatched zero-day exploit sitting in your core programming.
Because the hackers don't even need to break the door down at that point.
No, they don't. They just slip right through the invisible cracks you left behind.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. Because what makes this so vital is that to truly stop feeling overwhelmed and manipulated, we cannot just study the tactics of the hackers.
Right. Studying the external intruders is important, but it's not enough.
Exactly. If we stop there, we are still fundamentally vulnerable. We must also shine a very bright, very honest light on the hidden, often painful parts of our own internal programming.
The legacy code, like we were just saying.
Right, the legacy code. We have to understand the architecture of our own minds to truly secure the system.
Well, let's start with the intruders then. Let's look at the external threat first.
Okay, let's do it.
We are exploring this concept of the dark aspects of the human psyche. And to really get a grip on how this operates mechanically, we kind of have to travel back to the foundational structural model of human consciousness.
Okay. So we're talking about the Freudian concepts of the id, the ego, in the superego.
Yes, but we are looking at them through a much more modern neurobiological lens today.
Right, which makes a little more sense with what we know now. So it is a framework that separates the psyche into three distinct operational drives.
Okay, break those down for us.
First, you have the id. This is the primal, childlike, totally selfish instinct.
Like the caveman brain.
Basically, yeah. Biologically, we are talking about the ancient parts of the brain, the limbic system. And it is driven entirely by raw dopaminergic desires.
Things like survival, gratification, dominance.
Exactly. It has absolutely no concept of social rules, empathy, or consequences. It operates on a strict binary. I want it, I take it.
It is pure impulse then, like a toddler throwing a huge tantrum in the supermarket because it wants the candy.
Yeah, totally unconcerned with the social embarrassment it is causing the parent.
Right, the toddler doesn't care who is watching. So what is the second part?
Then you have the ego. Now, in pop culture, we use ego to mean arrogance, like having a big ego. But clinically, the ego is just the practical manager.
Okay, so it is the adult manifestation of the psyche.
Right. It largely resides in the prefrontal cortex, and its job is to deal with the outside world. It figures out how to navigate society, how to be charming, how to persuade others.
To basically get those primal needs of the id met, but in a way that reality actually accepts.
Precisely. It operates as the intermediary, the negotiator between those raw urges and the physical world.
Got it. And then there's the third part, which is the superego.
Yes, the superego is the internalized moral compass. This is the reflective side of our nature.
The part of us that actually considers ethics and cultural norms.
And the greater good, yeah. It is the mechanism that induces guilt when we harm someone else. But, and this is a crucial mechanism to understand, you cannot really access this moral compass until the ego has successfully brought those selfish instincts of the id under control.
Wait, really? So morality comes second?
Yeah, you cannot consider the moral good of society if you are entirely consumed by your own biological imperatives.
Okay, so mechanically speaking, where does dark psychological behavior actually come from in this specific model?
Well, dark psychological behavior occurs when the raw drives of the id and the strategic planning of the ego operate completely without the governance of the superego.
So the moral compass is just offline.
Completely offline. You have a highly intelligent prefrontal cortex figuring out exactly how to manipulate people to satisfy the primal urges of the limbic system.
But there are no brakes.
Right. The engine is running, the steering wheel works perfectly, but there are no brakes and absolutely no map of right and wrong. It is a highly functioning mind, but it is structurally incomplete.
Which is what makes it incredibly dangerous.
Exactly. There are no moral considerations. There is only a desire to be fulfilled and a target to exploit to fulfill it.
This actually brings up a sharp distinction that completely changed how I view all of this. There is a massive difference between different types of behavior driven by these instincts.
What do you mean?
Well, there's purposive behavior, and then there is predatory behavior.
Oh, yes. The motivation is the key differentiator there.
Right. So purposive behavior, even if it is unpleasant or aggressive, has a clear, understandable, logical goal.
It is driven by resource acquisition or self-protection. Like, if someone steals your wallet because they are literally starving and need to buy food, that is purposive.
Right. It makes logical sense, even if the action is objectively wrong.
But predatory behavior in the context of dark psychology defies that kind of logic. It can be completely random.
It can be totally purposeless in terms of resource acquisition.
Or it can be purely for the neurochemical thrill of exerting dominance over another human being.
So the cruelty isn't a means to an end. The cruelty is the end itself.
Exactly. It is manipulation just for the sake of seeing if you can make someone dance to your tune, just to feel the dopamine hit of control.
That is chilling. And this behavior is mapped out on what is known as the dark continuum.
Right. It is not just a binary switch of good person versus psychopath.
No, it is a vast spectrum of malevolent thoughts and actions. I mean, on one end, you have mild, everyday manipulation, the kind of stuff we all probably encounter in the office every week.
And then on the far end, you have severe psychopathy and extreme antisocial behavior.
So what is vital to understand about this continuum?
What is vital is that every single human being has the potential for this behavior. We all possess that primal id.
Right, we all have the caveman brain.
But those who actively lean into the darker end of this spectrum, they view the world fundamentally differently. They do not view other people as autonomous human beings with their own internal emotional landscapes.
How do they view them, then?
They view others purely as objects. They are utility mechanisms.
Just tools to be used.
Exactly. Tools to be used, exploited, and discarded once the dopamine reward has been extracted.
And that casual objectification is really what makes everyday manipulation so insidious, because it is happening all around us in totally mundane environments.
It really is. The research actually breaks down how this functions in daily conversation.
Yeah, it points out 4 specific rhetorical pillars that manipulators use to essentially bypass your critical thinking and control your reactions.
Let's examine the mechanics of those pillars. The first one is credibility.
Okay, so like claiming to be an expert.
But it isn't about actually being an expert. It is about leveraging the illusion of authority to shut down your prefrontal cortex.
So they might say something like, trust me, I consult for Fortune 500 companies.
Or, I have been doing this for 20 years. You just don't understand the complexities.
Right. It is a dominance play.
Exactly. It is designed to make you feel intellectually small, so you just abandon your own critical analysis and simply comply with their directive.
So it skips over the actual logical argument completely
No.
and just demands submission based on an assumed status.
Yep. You stop questioning the data because you feel unqualified to push back.
Okay, so that is credibility. The second pillar is emotion.
Emotion is incredibly powerful because it hacks the nervous system directly. This involves exploiting sympathy, inducing guilt, or leveraging fear.
So a manipulator might play the victim to trigger your biological caregiving instincts.
Or they might manufacture a chaotic crisis to activate your amygdala. And when your brain is flooded with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, your logical reasoning centers literally power down.
Wait, they actually power down?
Biologically, yes. They bypass your logic by hijacking your biology. You end up looking to them for safety from the very chaos they created.
That is wild, which leads right into the third pillar, which ironically is logic.
Right, but it is a skewed, weaponized kind of logic.
It is the creation of a labyrinth of false premises, isn't it?
Yeah, it is not objective truth. It is the use of skewed data, half-truths, or cherry-picked facts to build a narrative that just traps you.
Like when someone overwhelms you with statistics or really dense technical jargon.
Because they are fully aware you won't actually check their math. The goal isn't to educate you at all. The goal is to induce cognitive fatigue.
They prove they are right and you are wrong by just making the argument too exhausting for you to fight against.
Exactly. It creates a false reality that you feel you cannot escape.
Okay, so credibility, emotion, logic, and the fourth pillar is time.
This is the creation of false urgency.
Right, so things like, you have to decide right now, or this is a one-time offer.
Or, if we don't fix this tonight, the whole project fails. False urgency is a classic physiological hack.
How does that work in the brain?
By compressing the timeline, they deny your prefrontal cortex the necessary time it requires to process information, evaluate options, and actually consult that moral compass we talked about earlier.
It just forces an impulsive amygdala-driven decision.
Right. You just react out of panic.
Okay, well, I have to push back here for a second to clarify the boundaries of this. Let's look at those 4 pillars again. Credibility, emotion, logic, and time.
Okay.
If I go to a car dealership, the salesperson is going to tell me they are a certified expert. That is credibility.
Right.
They might talk about how safe the car is for my family, playing on my emotions. They will show me the fuel efficiency data using logic, and then they will tell me the promotional financing ends on Friday to create a time crunch.
That is all 4 pillars, yeah.
So are we saying every single salesperson using these techniques is a psychopath operating on the dark continuum?
That is a brilliant distinction, and it is so essential we clarify this. No, utilizing those 4 pillars does not automatically make someone a predator.
Okay, good, because I was getting worried.
The mechanics of persuasion and the mechanics of manipulation often use the exact same psychological levers. The distinction entirely comes down to intent and autonomy.
It really makes me think of a scalpel. You know, it is an incredibly sharp, efficient piece of steel.
Right?
In the hands of a skilled surgeon, that scalpel is used to perform a life-saving bypass. That is persuasion. You are using the tools to reach a mutually beneficial outcome.
I get a safe car I like, the salesperson gets a commission, win-win.
Exactly. But that exact same scalpel in the hands of someone in a dark alley is a weapon used to cause severe harm. That is manipulation.
The tool, the 4 pillars, is exactly the same.
But the intent behind wielding the tool and whether it seeks to respect or destroy the autonomy of the target changes the definition entirely.
That is the perfect analogy. Persuasion respects the autonomy of the other person. You are presenting information for them to actually make a choice.
Whereas manipulation seeks to strip that autonomy away.
Right. In persuasion, the truth is your ally. In dark psychological manipulation, the truth is merely an obstacle to be circumvented, distorted, or completely fabricated to achieve an antisocial end.
So if these psychological scalpels are just sitting out there and these tactics are so common in everyday life, from the boardroom to the living room, how do we spot the people who are most likely to pick up that blade and use it maliciously?
Well, that requires us to look much closer at the specific psychological profiles of those who comfortably inhabit the darker end of the spectrum.
We're looking at a specific cluster of traits, right?
Yes, clinically referred to as the Dark Triad. These are the personality architectures most prone to predatory behavior.
The Dark Triad. Okay, the first component of this triad is narcissism. And I think we really have to elevate the conversation beyond the pop culture definition here.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't just about someone taking too many selfies or being arrogant in a meeting.
No, it's a profound structural deficit in the ego.
Exactly. We need to distinguish between colloquial vanity and clinical narcissism. Narcissism, in this context, is characterized by extreme grandiosity,
Meaning a rigid belief that they are inherently superior to everyone else.
and therefore entitled to completely bypass the rules that govern normal society. But the defining feature, really, is a profound structural lack of empathy.
They simply cannot comprehend the internal emotional states of others.
Right, and what is crucial to understand about the mechanics of a narcissist is that beneath this towering, aggressive facade of superiority lies a deeply hidden, incredibly fragile insecurity.
Usually stemming from childhood, right?
Yes, often stemming from a ruptured early childhood ego. Their entire sense of self is just a hollow shell. They're completely dependent on external validation, which we call narcissistic supply, to keep that shell from collapsing.
It is a terrifying paradox, honestly. They absolutely require people to adore them and feed their ego.
But they simultaneously despise the people who provide that adoration because they view them as weak for submitting to them.
Wow. And they often use a technique called intermittent reinforcement to trap those people, right?
Yes, intermittent reinforcement is how they create trauma bonds.
How does that actually work?
Well, they will flood a target with intense affection and validation. This is the love bombing phase. Then, abruptly and without reason, they withdraw it completely. They become cold and cruel
And the target's brain just panics.
because it has become addicted to the dopamine of the affection. The target will do anything to get the warmth back.
So when the narcissist finally throws them a tiny breadcrumb of affection, the target experiences a massive neurochemical relief.
Exactly. And over time, this unpredictable cycle of abuse and reward wires the target's brain to become literally addicted to the abuser.
Okay, that is narcissism. The second component of the triad is Machiavellianism.
Named after the political philosophy, yeah.
Yeah.
This trait is entirely about cunning, strategic exploitation, and a complete detachment from conventional morality.
So someone high in Machiavellianism views human interactions purely through the lens of game theory.
Every single person is just a variable, a pawn to be moved, sacrificed, or manipulated to achieve a specific, calculated goal.
Unlike the narcissist who is driven by that fragile ego, the Machiavellian is often highly calculating, very patient, and just emotionally cold.
Right. They don't necessarily need you to adore them. They just need you to serve your strategic purpose.
And the final point of the triangle is psychopathy.
Psychopathy brings in an element of severe impulsiveness and a really chilling remorselessness.
Neurologically, this is fascinating. Psychopaths often have under-aroused autonomic nervous systems, don't they?
Yes. Things that would make a normal person's heart race, fear, extreme risk, causing someone pain, barely register for them at all.
Because their baseline arousal is so incredibly low.
So they require extreme stimuli just to feel anything at all. This allows them to act aggressively or manipulatively on a whim.
Often using incredibly convincing superficial charm just to disarm their targets.
And they experience absolutely no guilt or physiological stress for the wreckage they leave behind.
So you combine a desperate need for superiority, strategic exploitation, and remorseless thrill-seeking, and you have a predator.
A very dangerous one.
And historically, these predators were limited by physical geography. I mean, they had to find targets in their town, their workplace, their immediate social circle.
But we have experienced a terrifying shift.
Right. The internet has acted as a massive accelerant for these behaviors. It has created this frictionless, infinite hunting ground.
The digital landscape has fundamentally altered the rules of human engagement. Think about it. In face-to-face interaction, there is natural friction.
There's body language to read, immediate social consequences.
The visceral emotional reaction of the person standing right in front of you. That friction naturally slows down the eye.
But digital platforms just remove all of that friction.
They allow the impulsive, selfish parts of the psyche to operate in a total void, completely anonymously and seemingly without consequence.
The sheer scale of this is staggering. There are estimates of over 500,000 active online predators operating every single day.
It's wild.
And nearly half of all adults have reported experiencing some form of digital financial exploitation or identity theft in recent years. This isn't a rare anomaly happening in the dark corners of the web.
No, it is an epidemic of digital manipulation happening on everyday platforms.
And these digital manipulators use a sophisticated methodology referred to as cyberstealth.
This goes far beyond just sending out random phishing emails, by the way. Cyberstealth involves meticulously researching targets online before ever making contact.
Wait, like scanning my public profiles?
Exactly. They scour public profiles, comment histories, professional networking sites, and public records to build a comprehensive psychological profile of their potential victim.
What are they actually looking for?
Well, they're looking for technological limitations, like how secure is this person's digital footprint. But more importantly, they're scanning for psychological vulnerability.
They're looking for the legacy code?
They're looking for the open exploits in the system. And they use incredibly targeted tactics once they find them.
Take catfishing, for example, which is essentially the modern digitized Romeo con.
Right. They create a completely fabricated persona, perfectly tailored to appeal exactly to the vulnerabilities they identified in your profile.
So if your posts indicate you are recovering from a bad breakup and feeling isolated, they suddenly appear as the perfectly attentive, deeply understanding companion.
They systematically isolate you from your real-world support network, gain your absolute trust, and then exploit you.
Financially, emotionally, or both.
And one of the most destructive mechanisms they use once they have established the contact is gaslighting.
We really need to explain how this actually functions, because people use that word a lot, but it is not just lying.
No, not at all. Gaslighting is a profound form of psychological warfare where the manipulator consistently feeds the victim false information.
They deny past events with absolute conviction.
Or twist the truth so relentlessly that it induces severe cognitive dissonance.
It actually affects the brain physically, doesn't it?
Yes, it really does. Chronic gaslighting places the victim in a state of perpetual physiological stress. The brain is constantly flooded with cortisol.
And what does that do over time?
Over time, high levels of cortisol can physically degrade the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain responsible for memory formation and spatial navigation.
Oh, wow. So the victim isn't just psychologically confused. Their brain is literally losing its ability to accurately record and recall memories.
Exactly. They begin to doubt their own perception of reality and eventually their own sanity. The goal is to make the victim's internal compass so broken that they rely entirely on the manipulator to define reality for them.
So hearing all of this, 500,000 active predators, sophisticated cyber stealth, trauma bonds, the physiological degradation of gaslighting.
It's a lot to take in.
It makes me ask a really uncomfortable question. With all this invisible danger swirling around us, in the corporate boardroom, in our dating apps, in our social feeds, it just feels like we are sitting ducks.
I understand why it feels that way.
How do they know exactly who to target? If they are scanning millions of profiles, what makes them stop on yours or mine?
Well, that is the pivotal question that bridges the two halves of our entire analysis. The reality is, manipulators do not pick targets at random.
They don't.
No. They are highly efficient predatory systems. They look for specific behavioral markers that signal a high likelihood of compliance.
Okay, so this shifts our focus entirely from the external hacker to the internal system vulnerabilities.
Right. We have to look at what is emitting the signal.
Okay, so we are moving from studying the external firewall to finally running a diagnostic on our own internal operating system. We need to look at the legacy code.
Yes. Which brings us to a concept that is critical to understanding our own vulnerabilities. The shadow.
The shadow. Okay, explain that for us.
The shadow is a psychological concept used to describe the submerged, unconscious parts of our mind where we hide everything we deem unacceptable about ourselves.
So it is the repository for our deepest fears, our hidden shame, unresolved early life trauma, and limiting beliefs.
Exactly. It is every emotion and desire we have been conditioned to believe makes us unlovable, unworthy, or unsafe. So we just repress it down into the dark where we don't have to look at it.
Let's give a concrete example of how this legacy code actually gets written, because it usually happens in childhood, right?
Very often, yes.
Let's say you have a child growing up with a parent who is emotionally volatile or conditionally affectionate.
Okay.
The parent only gives love or only refrains from anger when the child is perfectly quiet, highly agreeable, and demands absolutely nothing.
So the child learns a very harsh, very quick lesson. Expressing my true needs or showing any negative emotion results in the withdrawal of love.
Which to a child feels like a literal threat to survival.
Right. A child's nervous system equates abandonment with death. So to survive this environment, the child develops a deep-seated wound, a profound fear of abandonment.
And to protect themselves from this unbearable fear, they write a new piece of survival code, a defense mechanism.
They learn to suppress their own needs entirely. They learn to hyper-attune to the emotions of the adults around them.
They morph into a chronic people pleaser.
Engaging in a trauma response, known as fawning. In their mind, keeping everyone else happy and regulated is the only way to ensure they aren't left alone or attacked.
And here's where the tragedy really happens. They survive childhood, but they carry this fawning defense mechanism right into adulthood.
30 years later, they are still running that exact same legacy code.
They think they are just being nice, easygoing, or a team player at work. But in reality, it is a trauma response operating completely on autopilot.
And this is exactly where we connect the internal and the external. That chronic fawning trait, which is a direct manifestation of an unhealed shadow wound, acts as a massive, glowing, homing beacon for those individuals utilizing dark psychological tactics.
It is the unpatched vulnerability.
Exactly. Narcissists and Machiavellians are constantly scanning their environment for sources of external validation and easily manipulated utility.
So someone who requires external approval to feel fundamentally safe, like our chronic people pleaser, is just the absolute easiest type of person to control.
The manipulator simply offers a tiny bit of validation, hooks the target, and then begins the intermittent reinforcement cycle.
Yeah.
And they just watch the target scramble and comply with anything to keep the peace and get that validation back.
So what happens when we just refuse to look at this? What if we decide that exploring the shadow is just too painful and we just keep ignoring it and pretending we are fine?
Well, ignoring the shadow does not make it disappear. It just forces it to manifest somatically.
Somatically, meaning in the physical body.
Yes. When we repress our deepest fears and traumas, it requires an immense amount of physiological energy. You are constantly engaging your sympathetic nervous system to keep those emotions suppressed.
So you are just constantly fighting yourself.
Over time, this chronic repression leads to a massive allostatic load on the body. It shows up as chronic physical pain, severe anxiety disorders, autoimmune issues, and profound lethargy.
Your body is physically exhausted because your nervous system is working overtime, 24/7, just to keep the vault closed.
Right.
It is like having a massive software program running in the background of your computer that you can't even see, but it is eating up 90% of your CPU.
Exactly. Your entire system slows to a crawl, the fan is screaming, the battery is dying, and you can't figure out why opening a simple web browser is causing the whole machine to crash.
That is such a vivid picture, and eventually the system does crash, doesn't it?
It does. The repressed emotions explode to the surface as toxic relationship patterns, explosive anger over minor inconveniences, or sudden overwhelming anxiety attacks.
We end up reacting blindly to our triggers because the shadow, that unseen background program, is actually running the show.
Rather than us responding consciously to the reality in front of us.
So, if ignoring this internal legacy code is quite literally destroying our physical health, crashing our psychological hard drive, and simultaneously acting as an open back door for manipulators, the vital question is, how do we patch the system? How do we actually heal this?
The process involves a very specific framework consisting of 4 essential pillars for internal healing: nervous system regulation, mindset, radical self-acceptance, and forgiveness.
Okay, so 4 pillars of healing to counter the 4 pillars of manipulation.
And the sequence here is absolute. You cannot jump straight into deep introspective shadow work or mindset shifts if you're in a physiological state of panic.
So you have to calm down first.
Your autonomic nervous system must be regulated before your prefrontal cortex can even process trauma.
So let's break down that first pillar, nervous system regulation. How do we actually do that when we are feeling triggered, when our heart is racing and our stomach is dropping?
We have 2 primary biological pathways for nervous system regulation. The first is top-down regulation.
Top down, okay, what does that mean?
This is the process of using your higher cognition, the prefrontal cortex, to calm the primal emotional centers of the brain, like the amygdala.
So it involves cognitive practices, mindfulness, conscious reframing, reality testing.
Yes, you are using your conscious awareness to send a neural signal to your body that you are safe.
So if I am sitting at my desk and I get a highly critical email from that demanding boss and I feel my chest tighten and my breathing get shallow, a top-down approach would be me closing my eyes, engaging my logical brain, and consciously telling myself, I am sitting in a chair. The building is not on fire. This is just text on a screen. My physical survival is not threatened right now.
Correct. You use the logical brain to soothe the physiological panic. But sometimes the trigger is so deep or the allostatic load is so high that the physiological reaction just overwhelms the logical brain.
The prefrontal cortex basically goes offline.
That is when you absolutely need the second pathway, bottom-up regulation.
Bottom up, okay.
This is somatic experiencing. It is using external physical actions to change the physiological state, which then sends a signal up to the brain that it is safe to calm down.
So it entirely bypasses the cognitive thought process.
Exactly.
So how does that work mechanically? What kind of physical actions are we talking about?
The most immediate and powerful tool is deep, structured, diaphragmatic breathing.
Like belly breathing.
Yes. When you take a deep breath that expands your belly and you make your exhale longer than your inhale, you physically stimulate the vagus nerve.
The vagus nerve, I hear about that all the time.
It is the superhighway of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system. When stimulated, it releases a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which acts like a biological brake pedal.
It literally forces your heart rate to slow down and your blood pressure to drop.
You are biologically hacking your threat response. Other bottom-up methods include conscious movement to release trapped kinetic energy, splashing cold water on your face to trigger the mammalian dive reflex, or deep pressure therapy.
And once the physical body is forced into a calm state, the logical mind comes back online.
And then, and only then, can you actually do the work of examining your mindset.
Okay, so once the nervous system is regulated, the alarm bells are turned off, we can move to the second pillar, mindset, and start exploring those hidden triggers.
Yes.
There is a fascinating way to spot this in your own life. The recommendation is to try tracking your emotional triggers for a week completely without judgment. Just act like a scientist observing data.
The absolute absence of judgment is critical here. You have to approach your own reactions with profound curiosity, not self-criticism.
Because if you judge the trigger, you'll just repress it again.
Exactly.
Right. So for instance, let's say you realize you get intensely, almost irrationally irritated by a coworker who is very confident, maybe a bit loud, and speaks their mind freely in meetings.
Okay, common scenario.
Your initial conscious thought might be, they are so arrogant and obnoxious, I can't stand them. But if you pause, use your breathing to regulate your nervous system, and look at the shadow. What is the actual mechanism operating there?
Well, in the realm of shadow work, intense, disproportionate irritation is almost always a mirror. That massive emotional reaction might actually reveal a repressed shadow desire within yourself.
Oh, wow, so it's about me, not them.
Perhaps you were taught, like the child in our fawning example, that speaking up is dangerous, that taking up space will lead to rejection. So you ruthlessly repress your own desire to be heard and seen.
And when you see someone else doing it freely, without consequence, it triggers your shadow.
Yes. Your intense irritation is actually masked envy. You desperately want to be more authentic and less fearful of judgment, but your internal legacy code won't let you.
Recognizing that dynamic, seeing the envy behind the anger, is a massive step toward the third pillar, which is radical self-acceptance.
It absolutely is.
Okay, I am entirely with you on regulating the nervous system, observing the mindset, and learning to accept those hidden, messy parts of ourselves. But I have to push back hard on the fourth pillar, forgiveness.
I thought you might.
I mean, I understand the theory, but let's be entirely realistic for a second. If someone has actively manipulated you, subjected you to cyberstealth, gaslit you until your memory degraded, or emotionally abused you using the dark tactics we mapped out, why on earth should you forgive them?
It's a fair question.
Doesn't that just absolve them of their actions? Doesn't that just make you a doormat?
That is a very common and highly logical point of resistance. But we have to redefine what forgiveness actually is in a clinical healing context.
Okay, redefine it for me.
It is a profound misconception that forgiveness is about the other person. Forgiveness is absolutely not about absolving the abuser. It does not mean what they did was acceptable.
Okay.
It does not mean you have to reconcile with them, trust them again, or ever allow them back into your life.
Then what is the actual mechanism of forgiveness? If it's not for them, what is it?
It is about untethering your own neurobiology from their toxic energy. When you hold on to resentment, anger, and a burning desire for revenge or justice, you are keeping your sympathetic nervous system engaged.
You are keeping a psychological umbilical cord attached between you and the manipulator.
Exactly. You are letting them live rent-free in your mind, which means they are still controlling your emotional state long after the interaction has ended.
Holding on to that anger keeps you locked in a perpetual state of victimhood.
And as we learned earlier, a victim mentality is a highly vulnerable state. Forgiveness is the internal unilateral act of taking scissors and cutting that cord.
It is an internal physiological reset.
You are dropping the allostatic load. It is taking your power back and refusing to let their past malicious actions dictate your present physiological and emotional reality.
Wow. Okay, so forgiveness is actually a defensive self-preservation maneuver.
Yeah.
It is dropping the rope in a tug of war so you don't get dragged into the mud. So as we patch these internal systems, regulating our nervous system, integrating these shadow parts, accepting our flaws, and cutting those toxic cords, we start building a fundamentally new architecture for our mind.
Yes, we do.
Which leads us to the ultimate defense mechanism: boundaries and emotional intelligence.
Right. As you integrate your shadow and practice radical self-acceptance, the natural, unavoidable byproduct is the creation of firm, healthy boundaries.
Because when you no longer harbor hidden shame about the broken parts of yourself, you no longer tolerate people who exploit those parts.
Precisely.
And what is interesting is how we have to redefine emotional intelligence, or EQ, here.
Yeah, that's a big shift.
We usually think of EQ as being highly adept at reading other people, being empathetic to their needs, predicting their emotions. But the foundation of true protective EQ is actually interoception.
Having a profound, real-time awareness of your own internal physiological states.
Your own triggers, your own needs, and your own absolute limits.
You cannot safely navigate someone else's emotional landscape if you are completely disconnected from your own internal signals.
And here is where the real-world application of EQ and boundary setting gets highly complicated. There is a fascinating, often incredibly painful paradox that occurs during this process.
Yes. As you heal, as you stop running that fawning legacy code and start setting actual boundaries, some of your relationships will actually get significantly worse before they get better.
Wait, really? You do all this work to get healthier and your relationships blow up?
Yes, because you're unilaterally changing the rules of the system, and systems resist change.
Oh, that makes sense.
In behavioral psychology, this is known as an extinction burst. The people who previously benefited immensely from your lack of boundaries, the people who relied on you to always say yes, to always absorb their stress, to always manage their emotional regulation.
They are going to experience massive friction when you stop.
When you set a boundary, their access to your energy is cut off. They will resist your new self-respect because it deeply inconveniences them.
So they will likely escalate their demands or manipulation to try and force you back into your old role.
Exactly. Some relationships will eventually adjust to the new dynamic and become healthier, but others will fundamentally break under the strain of your new boundaries.
And you have to have the emotional intelligence and the nervous system regulation to let those toxic connections fall away without feeling guilty.
It is hard, but necessary.
It makes me think of an immune system response. When your body finally recognizes a parasitic infection and starts fighting back, what happens? You get a fever, you get chills, you feel terrible.
But the fever isn't the disease.
Right. The fever is the friction of your body establishing a boundary against the parasite. The friction in your relationships when you stop people-pleasing is just the fever. It means the immune system is finally working.
That is a brilliant mechanical analogy. The fever is proof of defense. And to maintain that defense, to endure the fever, you have to use cognitive behavioral strategies to actively rewrite your internal narrative. Well, when you encounter an extinction burst from a manipulator, or when you realize you've been exploited in the past, your unhealed shadow might try to generate a shame spiral. The internal voice says, I am worthless because I fell for that Cyberstealth scam, or I am stupid for letting them treat me that way for so long.
Right, the system tries to revert to the old legacy code of self-blame.
Exactly. High interoceptive EQ allows you to catch that narrative in real time and leverage neuroplasticity to wire a new pathway.
You consciously reframe it.
You learn to say, I was manipulated because I am an inherently trusting and empathetic person. Trust is a pro-social positive quality. The manipulator exploited a positive quality.
So I am not worthless or stupid. I just needed to develop the specific wisdom and the firm boundaries necessary to protect my empathy.
You change the story from a narrative of victimhood and shame to a narrative of structural growth and resilience.
So armed with this profound internal awareness, these newly constructed boundaries, and a rewritten cognitive narrative, How do we solidify this? How do we step back out into a world that still contains a dark continuum without constantly living in a state of paranoia?
This brings us to the final stage of the evolutionary journey we are tracking: transcendence and taking control.
Okay, transcendence.
This is the profound conceptual shift from being a physical, highly reactive self, completely at the mercy of external stimuli, to becoming a mindful, observant self.
You stop living in a state of constant physiological reaction, and you start living from a place of grounded, regulated observation.
Yes. The roadmap for this state involved 5 specific tentpole concepts for overcoming adversity and neutralizing opposing forces.
We really need to unpack all 5 of these mechanically. They are oneness, resistance, control, calm, and empathy.
Let's explore how these operate as an integrated defense system. The overarching principle is that we cannot spend our lives hiding from the dark continuum.
Because manipulators exist, predatory behavior is just a reality of the human condition.
Instead of hiding behind a massive wall, we must learn to observe these forces and interact with them without absorbing their kinetic energy.
Let's start with the first tentpole, oneness. This usually sounds incredibly esoteric, but how does it function tactically?
Tactically, oneness is the recognition of systemic patterns. It is the understanding that human behavior, even dark behavior, is interconnected.
Meaning what, exactly?
When a narcissist attacks you, oneness allows you to see that their behavior is a manifestation of their own broken legacy code, their own ruptured ego. It has absolutely nothing to do with your inherent value.
By recognizing the interconnected system of trauma, you completely depersonalize the attack. You see them not as an all-powerful monster, but as a malfunctioning system.
Which immediately lowers your own biological threat response.
That perfectly sets up the second tentpole, resistance. But we aren't talking about aggressively fighting back, are we?
No. Aggressively fighting back often just feeds the manipulator the chaotic energy and dopamine they are looking for. Resistance, in this context, is like an isometric hold in physical training.
You aren't pushing them away, but you absolutely refuse to be moved from your grounded position.
You hold your boundary with silent, immovable resolve. You offer them zero momentum to work with.
Which requires the third tentpole, control. And this is about the locus of control shifting entirely inward, right?
Precisely. You stop trying to control the manipulator's behavior, which is impossible anyway, and assume total control over your internal landscape.
This goes back to radical self-acceptance. If you have mapped your entire shadow, if you have looked at all your flaws, your fears, and your past mistakes, and you accept them completely, you essentially strip the manipulator of their primary leverage.
A blackmailer cannot threaten to expose a secret that you are no longer ashamed of. If you have total internal control and lack shame, you cannot be externally controlled.
And to maintain that internal control under pressure, you need the fourth tentpole, calm.
Calm is the tactical application of autonomic regulation. It is the ability to keep your parasympathetic nervous system engaged, keeping your heart rate down and your breathing steady, even while someone is actively trying to trigger your amygdala using those 4 pillars of manipulation.
Because when you remain physiologically calm, you retain access to your prefrontal cortex, allowing you to see their tactics clearly rather than reacting blindly.
And seeing those tactics clearly leads to the final and perhaps most complex tentpole, empathy.
We talked earlier about how being highly empathetic and trusting can make you a prime target for predators, so we need to clarify this. Is empathy a fatal vulnerability, or is it a shield?
It is unequivocally your greatest shield, provided you understand the difference between effective empathy and cognitive empathy.
Effective empathy is feeling someone else's pain, absorbing their emotions. That makes you vulnerable.
Yes. Cognitive empathy, however, is the intellectual ability to deeply understand another person's psychological state without absorbing it. When you have done your own shadow work, your cognitive empathy becomes a highly advanced, finely tuned radar system.
You can basically reverse engineer their machinery.
So
you aren't just reacting to the words they are saying, you are reading the underlying code running behind their words.
Precisely. Because you intimately understand your own past insecurities, you can instantly spot the fragile, terrified insecurity hiding behind a narcissist's grandiosity.
Because you understand your own trauma responses, you can spot the calculated desperation behind a digital manipulator's sudden, overwhelming charm.
You easily recognize the pillars of manipulation: The false credibility, the manufactured emotion, the skewed logic, the fake urgency, because you understand the exact psychological deficits that are driving them to use those tools.
Cognitive empathy allows you to see the trap with crystal clarity, which allows you to sidestep it effortlessly without anger, without fear, and without absorbing their chaos.
You observe the system, you understand the malfunction, and you simply walk away.
It reminds me of the structural engineering of massive skyscrapers in earthquake zones. They don't build them to be perfectly rigid, impenetrable stone fortresses.
If they did, the kinetic energy of the earthquake would just snap them in half.
Instead, they use base isolation systems. They build the foundation to decouple from the ground movement. The building is aware of the violent kinetic energy. It might even sway slightly to absorb it, but it doesn't fight the earth and it doesn't shatter.
It uses advanced structural awareness to remain standing while the ground shakes beneath it.
That is the ultimate goal. You become the structurally sound skyscraper. The dark continuum is the earthquake. You cannot stop the ground from shaking, but you can build your internal architecture so flawlessly that the shaking no longer threatens your foundation.
Which brings us full circle back to where we started this entire journey.
Back to that visceral feeling of sitting at your desk or standing in your kitchen, feeling stuck, drained, your stomach dropping, and feeling overly compliant.
The ultimate revelation from everything we have explored today is that true invulnerability does not come from building massive, rigid, impenetrable walls around yourself.
It doesn't come from installing 1,000 firewalls while ignoring the code inside.
And it certainly does not come from trying to outmanipulate the manipulators or joining them on the dark continuum.
Exactly. True strength, real, unshakable resilience comes from having the profound courage to run a full diagnostic on your own internal system.
When you bravely explore your shadow, when you do the incredibly hard work of rewriting that childhood legacy code, when you regulate your autonomic nervous system and practice radical, unwavering self-compassion.
You systematically eliminate the very vulnerabilities that predators rely on. You patch the zero-day exploits. You secure the system from the inside out.
And that leads to a final thought I want to leave everyone with, a synthesis of the external threat and the internal defense. We have established mechanically that your deepest insecurities, your unhealed traumas, and your hidden shame are the exact handles that manipulators grab onto to steer you and control your behavior.
They are the specific levers they pull to bypass your logic.
So ask yourself this. What happens the day you finally look in the mirror, acknowledge every single flaw, every fear, and every scar, and decide that you unconditionally love and accept those insecurities?
Wow.
In that exact moment, the handles simply vanish. And without those handles, you become completely, beautifully ungraspable.
Ungraspable. What an incredibly powerful place to arrive at. So wherever you are right now, whether you are commuting, walking the dog, or just sitting quietly processing all of this, take a moment to reflect on your own internal architecture. Take a moment to celebrate your own resilience. The operating system is yours. You hold the admin rights. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.